listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Welcome to another edition of the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. I'm your host, Femi Abebefe. As always, make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you get your podcasts. Our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. Michael, we got an NFL football game this week. It's preseason Hall of Fame game week. We got the Bears and the Texans.
Yeah.
I know, obviously, it will not resemble what we'll see in September, but it is an NFL football game, and we have a lot of stories to get to on the headline docket here. But how we doing after the weekend? It's a lot going on in the National Football League. Always a good time.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like all I do is spend time looking at the sports scan and check the injury list that's coming in and out and who's sitting in, who's sitting out, who's not practicing. And, of course, my favorite thing of all time is the beat writers grading the receptions and completions in 9-on-7. It's the teamwork. Daniel Jones threw this pass to this guy. It's the evaluation. It's so interesting because, Jalen Hurts was 12 for 12 and 7-on-7, and that gets publicized and it's out there. Great. Wonderful. He's 12 for 12. That's wonderful. Well, what's that mean about the defense? Doesn't that mean your defense sucks?
Yeah.
Like, seriously.
What's the secondary doing?
If your quarterback is torturing your yeah, like this isn't college football where the first team defense is on field number 7 down there and the first team offense is on field number 1 over here. Like, no, they're everybody practices against one another. So to me, it's so comical to listen to that and read that and to react to a catch on a one-on-one. Drake May completed this deep ball. Like, seriously, when we're talking about a game, then we'll talk about it, right? I'm not saying practice isn't important. I'm not. But there are drills that are not evaluation drills.
Well, give us kind of the behind the curtains of what these teams, general managers, coaches, the coaching staffs are doing right now with the training camp film, because we know that they record it, they watch the film after their practice sessions. What are they evaluating? How are they evaluating? More importantly, well, yeah, you hope they do at least. But how are they evaluating practice? Because they're not charting this nonsense. Are they like, oh, well, Jalen Hurts went 12 for 12? Like, how are they watching it and how are they evaluating it?
Well, scouts grade players, right? So that's what they do. But if you're the general manager, you have to look at the big picture. You have to see how everything fits. Like the thing that bothers me most about as I sit back and watched Hard Knocks again, have you ever heard them mention, have you heard Joe Shane mention, how are we going to beat Dallas? How are we going to beat Philly if we don't do this?
Nope.
Have you ever heard him say that?
Nope.
It's been like none of that. Like when they signed Brian Burns, you know what Al Davis would have made me do first of all, he wouldn't have signed Brian Burns. But secondly, you know what he'd have made me do? He'd have made me put together, or I would have been I would have had it for him, every rush that Burns had against the left tackle of the Eagles, the left tackle of the Cowboys, and the left tackle, of the Washington team. Every one. Commanders, right? He would have had every one. Like that's who we have to beat to get out of there. So when you're in training camp, you're sitting there worrying about, okay, we have to beat this team to get out of this division. How do we match up? And so what you have in your board in your office is, okay, you have all the free safeties in the conference. You have it on. I have it on an Excel sheet. You have it on all the free safeties. Where do we rank in this ranking? Where are we? What do we need to improve? What do we need to do? One of the biggest mistakes I've ever made, we had a chance to trade for Charles Haley when I was in Cleveland, and we were in a rebuilding mode. But when we finally got good enough in Cleveland, we couldn't beat John Jackson, the left tackle. We could never put enough pressure on Neil O'Donnell. And if we would have had Haley instead of Anthony Pleasant, who was a good player, not a great player, we would have beaten Pittsburgh. Just that one move. And so you're constantly looking at your team saying, what do I need to do to improve? Where am I? How do I match up? Is this guy good enough? Yeah, you can block this guy in training camp, but he's probably going to be, in the professional field in 2 weeks. He's not going to be a pro player. So you can't get caught up in that. And how can we cover? Like, I promise you, Super Bowl winning GM Terry Fontenot is walking around his practice field saying, it's going to be hard to cut this team. It's going to be really hard to cut this team. We got so many good players. It's going to be hard to cut. And all his scouts are walking around saying, I don't know how we're going to cut the team. When you start talking like that, you have no chance.
Yeah, this is how we're going to get down to 53. It's the biggest challenge of training camp for some of these teams.
It would be easy. It'll be like the Giants saying, "How are we going to get to 53? I can get to 43 if you want on the Giants team. That ain't going to be a problem. Like you're not good enough. Like and that's what you're constantly thinking about. Where are we? How are we doing it? Where can we get better? How can we improve the team just a little bit? Where do we need more depth? What's our issue here? Like you can't think we've got this thing licked. Like if you're the Giants and you're watching Daniel Jones, you're saying, is he, instead of trying to convince yourself he's good enough, is he? Are we going to be good? Is Drew Lock good enough? And I think that's kind of the way the GM, where scouts just grade players. You could just see it. I mean, Shane's a scout, so he never has that conversation about what's it going to be, what do we have to do. He never models the team out. He never does that because it's always on a line item basis. This player, this player, this player. It's never about how do we put the puzzle together. And so as a general manager of training camp, you're looking at the puzzle. Like, what's our weakness? What do we need to do? How are we going to handle this?
Yeah. It's kind of looking at it in the whole grand scheme of things, not just in a vacuum, which it feels like that's what they're doing for a lot of the Hard Knock stuff. And who knows, like obviously they have editing power and all this stuff here, but I don't think they're leaving much out because based on what they're showing us, it doesn't seem like they're leaving much out of it. I mean, who knows?
The thing that makes me really pissed off the more I think about it is what it does is it takes somebody who sits at Biggie's restaurant up in North Jersey near the Meadowlands, right? It's a sports bar. It's that makes everybody who goes to Biggie think they can be a GM because they're showing them. That's how they think at Biggie's. Yep. That's how they think at every sports bar in North Jersey. We added this player. We added that player. So for me, it's insulting to the profession of team building to behave in that manner, to look at it. It's insulting because every fan in North Jersey thinks that's how it's done, when in reality it's not. It should not be done that way. It should be more professional. It should be more of this is the way we behave, this is what we do, this is how we handle things. And if we don't do that, then we look like fans, and we shouldn't look like fans. I mean, all those conversations in there are fan-based.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of what you were talking about with Pat McAfee earlier a couple of weeks ago, or it might have been last week, saying like, hey, like this kind of looks like it's a bunch of dudes just hanging out like fans who talking ball, and I don't think you want
Biggie's.
that.
Yeah, we're at Biggie's Sports Bar up in North Jersey. Yeah, I mean, Spagnuolo used to hang out at Biggie's too when he worked for the Giants. I mean, they say go over there, have a beer, have a burger, and talk football. Yeah, and then when basketball season comes around, you talk the Knicks. You talk the Knicks and the Nets. You can do it all. You're like Big Daddy.
Yeah, doing it all, and I'm sure Big Daddy will be busy in November as well, talking other stuff. But we also we saw over the weekend the two big quarterback contracts. Jordan Love signing his 4-year extension with the Packers, Tua Tagovailoa signing his 4-year extension with the Miami Dolphins. So now we're seeing more of the pieces, at least in the quarterback puzzle, coming together for these guys. I mean, these are massive deals. Tua with the injury concerns, and also can he play in bad weather? Jordan Love, 1-year sample size, and even in that 1 year, he only played really well in the back half of the season. So it's like you're buying into the second half of what we saw in 2023 for Jordan Love. Which one do you think is the bigger risk for each franchise going forward?
Well, I think what Miami did was they basically said they have a thick line. They drew a line in the sand and said after the 26, even after they convert the $25 million roster bonus for next season into signing bonus, assuming that they don't convert, they'll only be strapped with $34.8 million of dead money if they want to move on after the 27 campaign. So there's a way out of that deal. I think the Love deal, there's no way out. I mean, they're all in on Love. Whereas on Tua, there is some way out. But here's where I think we have to go back to, and this notion that I've talked about before, and I think it's completely bullshit. You have to get a quarterback on a rookie contract. No, you don't. With every new quarterback that deal's been done recently, it's all broken that 18% barrier, right? And we've only seen one team do that. That's the Kansas City Chiefs go over 14% of the cap. Mm-hmm. So as a competitor, right, the Giants are at 19% of their cap in Daniel Jones. Meanwhile, the Eagles are at 7% of their cap with Hurts. Okay, it's the way they structure the contracts. So you're basically, the Packers, the Dolphins, and the Jaguars have basically gone into waters that have yet to be proven fruitful for winning a Super Bowl over that number in terms of the threshold. And I think that's ultimately, we can judge these contracts for all we want, but I think at the end of the day, are we sure this is the right thing to do? Now, there's no alternative. I get that. If you don't sign Tua, what are you going to do? Okay. Well, you got to structure it so that you give yourself a back door, unlike the Cleveland Browns, who have no back door with Deshaun Watson.
Does it surprise you, though, that teams don't start planning for these alternatives? Because, if you were the Miami Dolphins, let's say a couple of years ago, and Tua's battling the concussions, has some decent moments where it's like, okay, we got a decent player. He's a good player, but do we think that this is going to be a great player? Don't you start to sort of plan for, hey, we need to have a plan B just in case of, so we don't get caught in a position to where we have to pay him because we think that the roster is ready to win a Super Bowl. I almost like the Minnesota Vikings and what they did, just moving on from Kirk Cousins, said, okay, our plan is to go up and get a quarterback in this draft. Let's say goodbye to Kirk Cousins. It feels like more teams, more often than not, are getting caught in the situation of we have to pay the guy because we do have no alternative, and the season will be a disaster if we don't get this done.
Oh, that's because most of the teams never model out their team. I mean, I'm picking on the Giants, but I think a lot of them don't model it. You think the Jets model it? Of course they don't. So when you don't model something out where, and then here's the other thing is you don't sit there and say, this player's a replaceable player, this player's a non-replaceable player. See, when you say that, when you have that sentence, and we're going to have to go to break in a minute, but when you have that sentence in, you really have to rely on your player development. You've got to be really good in player development so that if you let Brandon Ayuk go, then you got to make sure Ricky Pearsall is ready to play, or you got to have somebody that comes behind him. And that's part of modeling a team is great, but it involves player development. So like Drake London's fifth-year option, the Falcons can't wait to pick that up. But is Drake London a replaceable player? Of course he is. Is he a good player? Yes, he's a good player, but he's not. You can replace him, so why pay the freight? Why pay the freight? See, there's nobody thinking like a broker. There's everybody just thinking like they're managing the team on a player's name as opposed to asking the question, is he replaceable or non-replaceable?
100%. And just because a player is replaceable doesn't mean that they're not good, like you mentioned. London, good player, while also being replaceable. But there's the rare guys, like the Tyreek Hills of the world, who are the great, great players who are not replaceable. Exactly. I want to talk to you, though, about the quarterback position, because I think that's where this really gets caught up.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
Michael, I'm so glad you brought up the 49ers wide receiver situation with drafting Ricky Pearsall in case of Brandon Ayuk or Deebo Samuel no longer being on the team moving forward, because it feels like at other positions, teams kind of have this second-order thinking, or they have sort of this, all right, we got a plan for plan B of maybe this guy, we don't want to pay them for injury concerns or production concerns, what have you, but let's go ahead and draft and replenish to make sure we're not caught with our pants down. But for some reason at quarterback, teams don't operate that way. Some do. Obviously the Green Bay Packers drafting Aaron Rodgers while they still had Favre, then drafting Jordan Love while they still had Aaron Rodgers. I mean, the 49ers drafting Brock Purdy as the last overall pick, even though Trey Lance was on the roster. Some teams still do this, but more often than not, once teams feel like they have a guy or think that, okay, this guy's a good player, they don't really replenish like they should at the quarterback position, where it gets them kind of stuck. And that's why this market, I feel like, continues to just keep going up and up and up and up. And teams are like, what's our alternative? Well, you could have had one if you kept kind of replenishing the position.
Right. And I think to me, let's go, the 49ers are a great example. I mean, they basically said, they had Brock Purdy graded in the 4th round. So they were doing homework on quarterbacks. Maybe they didn't do all their homework on the top level guys, but they were doing homework on the second level guys, which I think you have to do because, and if you have somebody, and then you have to have a player development program too, to develop the kid, to develop the quarterback. If you don't, you're in trouble. And I think that it has to kind of tie all together because, let's face it, the coaches are always about who's going to help us win. I want to keep my job, and so they're focused on today and maybe even tomorrow, but barely tomorrow. Whereas some other, the general manager's job, Joe Shane's job, is to preserve the franchise and protect the franchise. And so you're always looking. Like for the Giants, not to even entertain drafting a quarterback at some point, even when they had Daniel Jones, is ridiculous. So you can't put all your eggs in one basket. I mean, look at the Saints. I'm not saying Spencer Rattler's going to be a good quarterback. I wouldn't draft him, but he certainly had the intangibles to do it. Whether he's got the size and the arm, all those things. But I think you have to have a plan for that. You have to have a plan for player development within the quarterback. If you don't, you're not going anywhere. And a lot of it too, though, Femi, is the fact that you're changing offensive coordinators every year, right? You're not really the organization doesn't have an offensive philosophy, so you're constantly changing and evolving in that area. Whereas if you have a structure and a belief from within, you can develop, this is the kind of quarterback we want, this is what we need in a system. But because of the randomness of the teams changing their personnel look at the Raiders. I mean, the new GM, the Raiders were built on the idea of a foundational structure, right? It was Al Davis comes in, this is who we are. And so whether coaches came or went, that foundational structure was never changing. But now Mark Davis is into a shift of foundational structure because he keeps screaming they want to be the Raiders, the Raider way, but nobody in the building even understands what the Raider way is. They think it's a representative of somebody from, somewhere, some tough guy. It's not. It's a philosophical belief on how to build a team through offensive and defensive line, through, having outside speed, all those things that go into it. And it's a team-building conversation. It isn't just a player acquisition conversation, which is what we miss. And we could just see it every single day because scouts are getting promoted to become GMs. So when all they do is they don't see the big picture. I was talking to a former coach in the league today about it, and I was asking him, have you been watching Hard Knocks? And he's like, no, and I was explaining. He said, well, they think like a scout. Yeah, that's right. They think like a scout. I'm not minimizing scouts, but the reason why there's a difference between being a scout and being an executive is you have to see the bigger picture and who's going to get player development going. That's a hard thing to do. And I've been there where it's been really hard, where you walking into trying to get the coach who wants to control who he drafts and who he picks to tell him to develop players, then you become a bad guy. Like, can we work on developing this guy? Can we give this guy some reps? No. You're the bad guy for asking that. When it has to come from the head coach, it has to be a partnership with the GM.
Yeah, that's how you get kind of the division between the general manager and then the coaching staff. And it's like, hey, they're not developing my guy, and the coach is saying, hey, you're not getting me good enough guys. But it's not even just the bad teams that do this, because while you were talking, I was thinking about when you're switching over offensive schemes and all of this stuff. Like look at the Philadelphia Eagles, who were running the Sirianni scheme. They had Steichen a couple years ago. Then it was Brian Johnson, and now it feels like they've totally shifted from that Sirianni philosophy offensively to now the Kellen Moore philosophy. And let's say the Eagles have a great season this year and they're putting up numbers. Joystick eventually is going to get a head coaching job. And then when he gets that head coaching job, now where are we at in 2025? Wait to give him one.
Exactly. It's like, what do we bring? Now, the one thing about the Eagles is they do a good job of trying to help the coach out through, different ways. But you're right. I mean, it's a real problematic issue if you don't have an organizational philosophy. And, and you've got to rely on the coaches to kind of buy in it. That's why the head coach is so important to what you're trying to get done. And he's got to coach the coaches. He's got to develop. The head coach has got to be like a personnel director, too, in terms of, okay, that guy's worth developing, that guy's not. But most of them are so busy with their heads stuck in the ground looking at their play sheets, they can't, they just leave it to the other coach. When you got to have somebody who's in charge of player development within the building. Where's our farm system? That's why in baseball you have a farm system. You have minor league instructors. When Gene Michael, which is the Yankee Way, I mentioned that before on the pod. Yep. It's really a good book. But where Gene Michael came in and made all the minor league instructors teach a certain thing. Well, that's what you want in player development. You want to be able to have everybody, and this is what we're teaching. This is who we are. I mean, these staffs are enormous. Do you think Mayo's going in and telling the defensive back coach how he wants it taught? Of course not. So when they lose a defensive back coach, then that coach is going to come in and teach a different technique. That's why you get on this treadmill of the NFL, and it has no way of going. And you say, well, if it's so easy for you, Lombardi, how come everybody doesn't do it? Because it's too hard to do. Nobody wants to do it, and the owner's not willing to give control to somebody. So you see it in the Giants. It just slips away. I mean, the Giants were the prototypical team. This is who we are. This is what we're looking for. This is what we want to become. Chris Marin knows this. I mean, he grew up in it. But now there's nobody to coordinate the player development. There's nobody to coordinate player development. There's nobody who buys into it. Where when you had Parcells there, as much as he bitched about George Young, he bought into that philosophy. He believed in size, speed. He believed in this. Belichick, same thing. You can disagree on the players, but they didn't disagree on the philosophy.
Yeah, and I think that's what kind of brings us back to the most important position at quarterback. It's like you can develop if you have a plan and you're actually developing these guys along the way. Even if you have a starter who you like, continue to keep developing and having an actual system to where, like you see with the Green Bay Packers with Jordan Love, he's able to develop in the LaFleur system to where then in his first year there were struggles, but he ended up looking pretty good.
Forget that. I mean, look at what Ron Wolf did when he was there. He trades Hasselbeck for a first-round pick. He trades Brunell.
Yeah.
I mean, but Ron wouldn't have been able to do that without Holmgren's player development.
Yeah.
See, Holmgren was developing quarterbacks, put them in games, make them look good, get them in a preseason game. They got talent. Next thing you know, boom, here they go. You know, and that's called player development. It's the same thing you do. That's why when you're sitting there and you're modeling a team and you got Dak Prescott's going to be 2 years ago, you should draft a quarterback, right? Okay, let's get somebody in here, not Cooper Rush. That's why they took Trey Lance. The reason they traded for Trey Lance is because they had such a high grade on him coming out in the draft. Yeah. They had like this really, really high grade on Trey Lance coming out in the draft. So Jerry's like, okay, if we had this high grade on Trey Lance, and this is what the scouts think he is, then let's bring him in here and see if he is. Now, I'm told reliably that, you know, he just doesn't process quick enough. It's just everything's too slow. It's just it doesn't happen. The game, and you and I had this conversation off air yesterday. Yep. You know, it's like that's something that's an instinctive part of life.
Yeah, it's like, because we were talking about like how like just man, Trey Lance, go let it rip. Even if you make mistakes, like let's cut it loose a little bit. And then you were talking about how like, hey, like he's just not processing it quick enough to actually do those things. Because we were talking about how like they were saying that he was checking down a lot in practice and he's kind of looking to avoid mistakes and be risk averse. When it's like, buddy, this is practice. Like if you're not making mistakes in practice, you're not doing this the right way. And it seems like it's kind of the same old for Trey Lance, even though the Cowboys have had him for a full year now.
It's not in him, but. I think what's fascinating, what I think is really fascinating, which is obviously no one's going to be talking about this, but what I think is really fascinating, what's going on in the National Football League, is the decline in RPO. Okay? That we have now become a league that understands how to defend the RPO game. Okay?
Yep.
And because of that, just think about this, Femi. Jalen Hurts, who was dynamic in the RPO game, he had 122 pass attempts in 2022 in the RPO game. He gained 1,068 yards in those attempts. All right. Last year, they cut it down to 89, and he only gained 498 yards. The RPO game is dying in the league. It's dying, and that's where he was really good. 3 years ago in 21, he had 95 for 819 yards. So these numbers have gone, it went up, it spiked, and now it's gone down. Whereas Brock Purdy isn't an RPO quarterback. That's not him. Jalen is. That's where he was making a lot of it. But people understand how to defend it. They understand what they're doing to it. And if you take that away, you know, if it becomes problematic to handle, then it becomes even harder for you to get it, you know, and then now all of a sudden you're sitting there and you're saying, wait a second, you know, I got all these plays. I mean, last year RPO for Tua was he gained 105 attempts, he had 1,000 yards. Well, those receivers make a huge difference, right?
Yeah,
they make a huge difference.
Yeah, it feels like Miami's whole offense is pretty much based on that RPO game, and Tua ended up leading, I should say, the league in passing.
And play action pass. See, 2 years ago in play action, he was at 1,400 yards in play action. Last year he was only at 1,100. So people are playing his play action. The RPO stuff has got but the good coordinators last year in the RPO game, when they stopped that from Miami, that's when they stalled.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting, and we'll see how it plays out in 2024. The Eagles are making that adjustment to their offense. Can the marriage of Jalen Hurts and Kellen Moore work? We'll find out a little bit later on once the games actually get rolling. But on the other side, let's talk about Dak Prescott, because Love got the extension, Tua got the extension. Will Dak be getting one soon? We'll discuss it next year on the GM Shuffle.
You're listening to the GM Shuffle with Michael Lombardi, presented by DraftKings and VSiN. Here is Femi Abebefe.
All right, we've had some really good discussion about the NFL and these quarterback contracts and why it is the way that it is and why it ain't the way that it ain't. And I think the most interesting one happens to be my team, the Dallas Cowboys, and quarterback Dak Prescott. We've been headed down this road ever since, in my opinion, they signed him to that extension in 2020. He gets the no tag clause, the no trade clause, giving him unprecedented leverage over the team. And Dak Prescott was asked about it at training camp earlier this past week about, hey, are you concerned about not having a contract, and could you ever see yourself playing for another organization? Here's what Dak had to say.
I'm going to say, I want to be here, but, when you look up, all the great quarterbacks I watched played for other teams. So my point in saying that is, that's not something to fear. That may be a reality for me one day, may not be my decision. So that's the freedom that I have is be where your feet are, make the most of it, be confident in yourself, make your team better. I love my teammates. I love that locker room. I love everything about being out here in Oxnard and being a Dallas Cowboy.
Well, Michael, will Dak's feet be in Dallas come March, or do you see him potentially going to another organization after having a really good career with the Dallas Cowboys?
Well, I think this. I think Jerry feels like he's going to be able to win against anybody who comes after Dak contractually. I think where Jerry's stuck, and I think Steven mentioned this in a recent interview, that, what does his team look like? Like if they pay Dak a substantial amount of money, which I'm sure they're going, he's obviously going to get paid well, whatever you think of him. He's going to make a ton of money. But right now, when you look at their team, Dak is sitting there eating up so much of their cap that they have no, they're going to have to do something. His base salary is $29 million. I mean, they could easily convert that. They just don't want to. They don't want to do that. They have proration dead money coming out the butt on them anyway. So, but I think, to me, I think Jerry feels like he's not scared of free agency. He'll overpay to keep him. And what quarterback really wants to leave the Cowboys? Like, where's Dak going? Is he going to go for the Las Vegas Raiders? How much would they have to offer him to beat Dallas? Both tax-free states, right? Jerry has that advantage, right? So right now, where is he going to go? We know the Raiders are looking for a quarterback. Obviously, they're having quarterback battles, right? Who else is looking for? Where else could he go? You start writing it down. Like, okay, would Tampa entertain cutting Mayfield and put him in there? Would they do that? I mean, Chicago's not going to cut Caleb Williams. I mean, Detroit's not cutting Goff for Dak, right? Kansas City's not going to cut him. The Chargers aren't going to cut Herbert. Would Denver get rid of Knicks after a year to bring in Dak to pay him all that money with cap? Like, okay, Seattle would be a play, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe Seattle moves on from Geno and goes, okay, so we got Seattle. So start thinking about it, right? Seattle and the Raiders. Like, who's his competition?
Would New Orleans ever go down that road?
Jerry's scared of his competition. I don't know how they can, because they just redid Carr's contract. Now he's carrying a bunch of debt.
Yeah, that's because Dak is being like a Louisiana guy, maybe that going home or whatever, but he grew up a Cowboys fan, so I would assume that he would still have ties to that organization. It would have to go way over the top.
When you sit and think about it, you go back to it. I mean, I'm not saying he's not going to make money, because he is, but if you're Jerry, what's your competition? Okay, would the Jets get rid of Rodgers? Okay, that's a possibility, but New England next year is not going to get rid of Drake May to sign Dak. Washington's not going to get a Jaden Daniels after a year and sign him. Would the Giants be your competition? Okay, yeah, they would be. All right, so they get rid of Daniel Jones. They sign. But now the Giants have to pay 10% more than what Jerry's going to pay just to make it an even deal based on Jersey state taxes.
Yeah, I mean, could you imagine?
So there we are.
Yeah, that would be
Pittsburgh. Pittsburgh could be in play. Russell's no good. Okay, they're in play. But, again, what's this, the ramification? So you can count on one hand how many teams are really going to be in play here for him. Like the whole NFC North isn't going to be in play. I mean, Atlanta, probably Super Bowl winning GM, probably would want to add a third quarterback to his team. Why wouldn't he want to do that?
Yeah, let's have the best QB roster in the league: Dak, Cousins, and Michael Penix Jr.
I mean, I'm just gonna keep at. Let me. Hey, Arthur, I need another $100 million. I got to sign Dak for a 2-year deal, just in case.
We'll rotate every 3 weeks. We'll just rotate.
Yeah. So like when you write it down, like how many what did I mention? I mentioned how many teams. I mean, Tennessee's not ready. Maybe Tennessee would be one. So let's go. Yeah. Tennessee, Pittsburgh. Maybe the Jets if Rodgers gets hurt, and the Giants.
The Giants,
yeah. And Seattle. I mentioned 5 teams. And so Jerry's sitting there saying, okay, those 5 teams, the ones that have state income tax, take them off the board because I'm going to beat them. Now, does the kid want to go play in Las Vegas as opposed to playing here if the money's even? Of course not.
But what if the structure of the contract?
So Jerry's not scared of free agent. Jerry's not worried about this. Jerry can outstructure anybody. He's got more cash than anybody.
But does he want to go fully buttoned up? Because what if the Raiders offer a fully buttoned up?
Well, I mean that would be. I don't think the Raiders could afford to do that. So when you go fully buttoned up, you have to have a very, very wealthy owner who's got a lot of cash sitting in the bank. That's not the Raiders. No, Mark Davis is very wealthy, but he's not liquid. You got to be really able to if you do that. So and that eats your cap too much. I mean, we've just talked about over 14% of your cap total is over. So like Jerry's sitting there saying, "Who's my competition?" I think the bigger issue is how good do you think Lamb is, and they think Lamb's really good, and how much do you going to pay Lamb?
Well,
they're going to sign Parsons. He's a non-replaceable player.
Yeah.
So you've got, to me, I would be focused on Parsons. I would basically try to do a short-term deal with Lamb for this year and next year. Ideally would get him to play on the option in a franchise. That would be even better. But I don't think the kid's going for that. But, I would trade him. If it were me, I would trade him because I know I'm going to sign Dak and I got to sign Parsons, and I can't have 3 players eating $200 million of my cap.
Yeah.
You're a fan. Rank the 3. What order would you sign him in?
Parsons, 100%. He's the clear number 1 for me.
Parsons.
My trouble with Dak is like they don't really have the alternative because we've heard about Trey Lance, and Cooper Rush is never going to be a long-term starter. But I would like to see the Cowboys go down the Minnesota Vikings path and quote unquote free themselves from the jail. Now Jerry's not going to do that, but if I were running the team, that's what I would do. I would play out the season and say, all right, let's see how this goes, and if it goes how I think it's going to go, I say, you know what, Dak, you had a hell of a career. We wish you the best of luck. We're going to just go down a different path. Now, even if you do that, you still have a $40 million cap hit if he's not on the roster next year. So that's still something that you got to eat. But I think eventually, if you can draft a quarterback or do some sort of alternative, I think that, especially if you're Jerry Jones, like Jerry Jones is the general manager. He doesn't have to worry about job security. You would think that he would be a little bit more bold in doing something like this.
But I think he's also older, and so it's hard for older people to change. He's comfortable, and you'd go through a change of quarterbacks into the unknown, as the great Larry Boyd's nephew said, I don't want to go in the unknown not knowing. I don't want to go in the unknown not knowing. Jerry's doesn't want to do it.
Yeah.
So I think, to me, that's kind of where that is.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Like, I don't think Dak is going to sign until free agency in March because I think he'd be silly to do that. Like, go ahead and just wait, play it out. Like, he's a gambling man. He said it himself. He's willing to go ahead and take the risk. He did it with his career earlier. He got hurt. He got the no tag clause and the no trade clause. It would have to be a catastrophic injury, which, knock on wood, hopefully that does not happen to Dak Prescott. It would have to be something like that for him to not cash in on what's going to be a pretty lucrative deal whenever it happens between now and free agency in March. We also saw the Matthew Stafford news. That came out last week. We had been talking about it quite a bit throughout this offseason, but we finally got some of the details. This was from Ian Rappaport over at NFL Network. Stafford is going to receive $5 million more upfront this year, money that was pushed from a later contract year, and then it'll also bump up his 2025 roster bonus from $5 million to $9 million. You can kind of put the Rams sort of in this conversation of what's the alternative, like what are we going to do beyond Matthew Stafford, but at least it looks like they've kind of tweaked things for Stafford to get his money a little bit sooner.
Right. Now, if Stafford hurts his elbow and they're looking for a quarterback, would they be interested in Dak? I'm sure they would be.
Yeah.
Because Sean McVay's not going to be sitting back waiting for the next guy, and it's certainly not Stetson Bennett, or at least we don't think it is. So, but I thought this was interesting. They didn't do a lot to the deal, but they did do something. I mean, it's a good deal for the Rams. They gave him, $5 million? And here's the key for the Rams is they didn't do anything that hurts their cap down the road, which is good.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good deal for the Los Angeles Rams. I think the Rams are a team that this year, the more I think about them, the more I kind of like how they're set up, and they could be a dangerous team in the play. Maybe they even push the 49ers in that NFC West. Speaking of the 49ers, Ayuk still holding in, Williams still holding out. Which one do we think is going to happen first? Is it Williams? They're going to do something to his contract to get him back into camp? Like, where do we see this going over the next couple of weeks or so?
Look, they need Williams. That offensive line is not good enough without the left tackle. They need Williams. He's the key to their team, one of the keys to their offensive team, and they know it. I mean, they know it. They'll get him done. Now I hope he's in shape, and the fact that he's missing practices doesn't alarm me, because you don't want him to get hurt in the summer, but he's going to need to get in there. But I think they'll get him done. Ayuk, to me, I'm sure they made an offer to Ayuk, but at some point he's either going to have to take it or start playing football. I don't think you can just keep wandering around. Like, I don't understand why teams let players hold in, but I guess it's just, they don't want to ruffle anybody's feathers.
Yeah. I mean,
like Jamar Chase, to me, Mike Brown is always been accused of being cheap. I don't think that's accurate. Mike Brown's frugal. Mike Brown doesn't want to overpay for something, right? He doesn't want to overpay for a player. He doesn't want to overpay for a good player. He'll pay for a great player like he did with Burrow. He'll pay for Chase. I think Chase will end up being the highest paid receiver. He'll probably beat Jefferson's deal.
So Zach Taylor said that this is a part of some sort of plan. I don't even know what that means. But I was a little surprised that Chase is holding in, because he showed up to mandatory minicamp. He's been a part of the spring process, and I'm sure he wants to get paid like his buddy Justin Jefferson. But this is the first year that he's eligible. I would have figured that he would have been kind of in the Micah Parsons boat, where he's like, I'm not really concerned about the contract. Let's go play some football. Well, my agent will figure this out next year or whatever, once I get a little bit closer to kind of coming up on that free agent deal. This was a little bit strange that Chase, I don't know if he's forcing their hand, but he showed up to training camp, but just hasn't practiced. He's missed about 4 practices so far.
Yeah, I mean, look, you got to prepare for it. I think they want to get him done. I'm sure of that. I don't think Mike Brown doesn't want to get him done. I think he will get him done. A lot of this comes down to timing and element, but knowing him, they'll pay. I mean, they're going to pay for a great player, and I know they believe Chase is a great player. I don't know what they'll do with Hendrickson, who's been a very good player. And look, this defense was so bad last year, 32nd in so many categories. They couldn't really stop the pass at all, couldn't stop the run. They killed themselves. So they need Hendrickson healthy. Hubbard got hurt yesterday. I saw that on the clips. So that's not a good situation. They need all their defensive players to really compete. And Zach Taylor's made it a point to talk about what we talk about all the time, Femi, on the pod, is to try to ramp up his preseason activity, because he started 0-4 the last 2 years. You had the first 2 games of the year, he's 0-4. I don't think you can start at 0-4 in the North. And I know it's doable, but it makes it very challenging to come back.
100%. They'll be behind the 8 ball. They were like that last year, where they started slow. They started to catch on, beat the Niners with a really impressive win, and then all of a sudden Burrow gets the wrist injury, and then the season's sort of over. Earlier this week at VSiN this past week, and we had Charlie Goldsmith on of the Cincinnati Enquirer, and he said that Zach Taylor's going to play his starters throughout the preseason. So that's a little bit of difference in philosophy of what we've seen in the years past. Zach Taylor kind of treated it sort of like how McVay treats the preseason, where it's just like, you know what, like, we're not playing anybody who's a starter, and it's worked out for McVay. he makes sure his team is at least ready to go early on in the season. But it hasn't really worked out for the Cincinnati Bengals and Zach Taylor early in the season, which is why even though they made the Super Bowl and they made a conference championship game, the highest seed that they've ever been with Joe Burrow has been a 3 seed because they usually kind of start behind the 8 ball and give up some of those games in early September.
Yeah, no question. He's got to change his strategy on that. I don't think he can give away that because with only one home field, I mean, look, they've won in Kansas City before. They've done that. Yeah. So, but they have to be more physical at training camp, and they've got that battle at right tackle, whether it's Mims or Brown. They need to fix that. This offensive line's got to stay healthy for him because Burrow has been hurt. I mean, let's be clear.
100%. He's been banged up at some point or another throughout his career. How about their division rival, the Pittsburgh Steelers? Russell Wilson has been dealing with a calf injury and has not practiced yet so far at training camp. Justin Fields has been taking the reps with the ones. Could we see a potential battle here, Michael? Could something be brewing in Pittsburgh as Justin Fields continues to get these reps? And I'm not even sure how he looks. I've seen a couple throws, but it's training camp. You don't know what the hell's going on.
I mean, you have no idea. I mean, but look, it helps Fields. It certainly can help Fields. Because now what's happening, it isn't what happens on the field. It's what's going on in the relationship between him and Arthur Smith. He's getting better. They're measuring it in baby steps. Yeah, he's really improved in this area. He's taken the reps. He's got it. Give him a chance to command the team, be in the huddle. All these things can go to it, but it's really about what happens off the field, his preparation, his handling, his assignments. Does he make the same mistake over and over again, which none of the fans can see. All they see is a completed pass. Yeah. Those are the kind of things that are going to go in towards, can he close the gap on Russell Wilson? Look, this calf injury, I mean, it hurt Burrow for a while. I don't know. It doesn't sound like it was the degree that Burrow had last summer. But these calves for quarterbacks, that's where you get your power and you throw the football off of. It's going to be critical. But, the reps, look, at this time of the year, they need them. I think Pittsburgh, when you look at Pittsburgh's numbers and how they play, think about this. They won 10 games last year, Femi, and they lost to New England and Arizona. I mean, that's really remarkable. People say, well, they can't win it again. I know. It's unbelievable. I thought the most ridiculous thing of all time was this Raiders. I mean, what are we doing? Why would we piss off Mahomes? I thought Mahomes' line was great when he said, "I'll get it handled when it gets handled." I got you. When did they become the chief dominator?
They said they had the Mahomes rules from earlier this offseason. You remember that one? And for those who don't know, I mean, I'm sure a lot of fans have seen this by now, but it was the rookie cornerback for the Raiders. It was a fan that had this Kermit the Frog with Patrick Mahomes jersey on it and the Mahomes hair, and it's kind of making fun of his voice. And it's silly to do this to a guy that's been kicking your ass since 2018. Yeah, you won on Christmas Day, but what are you doing? Mahomes has made Allegiant Stadium his second home. What are we doing here? It doesn't make any sort of sense to me. I even said it. I'm circled it. October 27th, the Chiefs play at the Raiders. That's the first time they play this season. Just lay the points. Lay the points with KC. As long as Mahomes is healthy, lay the points.
They're not going to stop. They're not going to stop. Yeah, they're not going to stop. If they can block them. Now, look, the Raiders are good. I mean, you got Wilkins, a blue-chip player. Yeah. You got Crosby, a blue-chip player. I don't know where Wilson's going to be. Kuntz played better down the stretch. I mean, they're going to give that chief offensive line everything they can handle. But, the quarterback situation at the Raiders, right now, Aiden O'Connell seems to be the guy who's leading the which doesn't sound good enough. No. Right? If that's your star, I've said this. I know that some people that interviewed for the Raider job told Mark Davis to trade Davante Adams. But I think I know Mike Greenberg went on Pat McAfee's show and said that he expects him to get traded. I think if this thing continues to go where there's uncertainty at quarterback, trading Adams would be the right thing to do because he could be disruptive from within, especially if he's not getting the ball and they go 3 quarters like they did against the Chiefs without a completed pass. It ain't going to be pretty.
No, we've seen the Netflix receiver series, and he was wearing those losses and the lack of production. He was wearing it pretty tough. And if it continues, like you mentioned, it could get ugly for the Las Vegas Raiders. And maybe this is the time to trade him if you are the Raiders. Sell high on the Davante Adams stock because I don't think he's an ascending player. That's not any shade towards Davante Adams. I'm not even calling him washed or anything close to it. But where he's at in his career, this is probably the best it's going to be, and it's only going to go down for Davante Adams. So maybe you sell him at the peak and go ahead and get something and just kind of go forward with the rebuild. But, I mean, who knows? Does Antonio Pierce have that time? Does he have time for a rebuild? Or is his job going to also be up for grabs? Like it's a lot of competing.
I mean, I got it. I think he's got it. I mean, look, again, who knows? I mean, there's a lot of you're going to have to produce, and if it depends on what it looks like, right? I think to me it depends on what it looks like.
Yeah, if they get off to a bad start, though, make sure you keep your eye on that. It could be the Jets. Maybe there's a mystery team out there who's eyeing Devontae Adams as well. But a lot that we got in on this podcast. We're only getting warmed up here with the GM Shuffle. We have a football game on Thursday. We'll, of course, have our Thursday episode, blue chip, red chip, interior, defensive line. And then we'll look forward to the Hall of Fame game. And also Hall of Fame weekend. It's always a nice weekend in Canton as we get the new enshrinees over there in Canton, the inductees to the Pro Football Hall of Fame. But that does it for this edition of the GM Shuffle. Thanks to our producer, Elliot Bowman, with us on the ones and twos. Subscribe, rate, and review as always. The YouTube page, keep commenting, keep liking those videos. We love the interaction that you guys give on our YouTube page over at DraftKings. So continue to do that as well. And we'll see you guys on Thursday. Take it easy, Mike.